of new shelter space. There is a current SDC waiver. It's applied to mass shelters, but it's not applied to short-term housing. I'll get to the distinction between those two in just a second. And then the current SDC waiver requires a 10-year minimum operating period. What we're seeing is shelters right now that don't always have that 10-year minimum lined up. They may be seasonal, or they just don't have a 10-year lease period. The difference between a mass shelter and short-term housing, and this waiver would apply to both, is that mass shelter is a structure with one or more open sleeping areas. Individual sleeping rooms aren't provided, and a mass shelter is operated by a public or nonprofit agency. For mass shelters, you can picture the foster shelter. Short-term housing is a structure with one or more open individual sleeping rooms, and it's also operated by a public or nonprofit agency. For short-term housing, you could picture Kenton Women's Village. Like I said, the current SDC waivers are applied to mass shelters that provide shelter for a minimum of 10 years. What the proposal is SDCs would be waived for mass shelters and short-term housing projects and this should say, with confirmation from the Joint Office of Homeless Services.
Can we go back for a second? There's a big difference between operating agreement and confirmation.
Yes, and so, this is a typo in the presentation, I'm sorry.
So you're saying there's no, we're on one hand we're saying it doesn't have to be 10 years, now you're saying it doesn't have to have an operating agreement, it just has to have confirmation. So is that, well Mark, I'll wait till your presentation, but let me be clear, there has to be a clear public benefit and there has to be a clear trigger. In an operating agreement we can verify, confirmation gets a little squishy, so I want to know just how that works.
So the process that we had laid out is that the Joint Office of Public Services would provide SDC bureaus with a letter saying the shelter has confirmation. SDC bureaus would calculate and waive the SDC fees. Joint Office would be responsible for tracking the shelters receiving the waiver and the amount. And then the Joint Office would notify SDC bureaus if the shelter was no longer operating. This is intended to give you a snapshot of the SDC fees that are assessed at shelters. And keep in mind that different bureaus assess fees differently, and there's different types of projects where different fees would be triggered. So this is really just a snapshot of what we've seen so far. In addition to these, there would be likely the Willamette Center would be requesting the SDC fees waived, and then there's Right to Dream 2 and Hazelnut Grove, which also do come in with permits and request those fees to be waived as well. The ordinance proposal is to amend Title 30 to create a new section for SDC waivers for mass shelters and short-term housing. It would amend Title 30 as well to remove the current references for mass shelters from the section that it's currently in, which is waivers for affordable housing. And then there's, in order to align codes, there are minor amendments to Title 17, Title 21, and Title 30. And the ordinance has been structured as an emergency ordinance. That's the end of the presentation.
So I'll provide my prepared remarks and then come back to your question, Commissioner. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Mark Joel, and I'm the Director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. I'm here today to express my appreciation for the SDC waiver measure you are voting on today. I want to thank the Mayor's Office for initiating this effort and for the partnership with the SDC bureaus and the Bureau of Development Services. Since the declaration of state of emergency, we've opened more than a dozen year-round and temporary shelters in this community. We've both more than doubled the number of publicly funded year-round shelter beds available and more than doubled the number of people who benefit from emergency shelter each year. Last year, it was approximately 8,500 people. But as Matt said, we don't foresee our need for shelter diminishing. We are in the midst of several projects to upgrade the quality of our permanent year-round service-enriched shelter capacity, and we anticipate additional ones in the future. We also expect to continue to look for temporary and alternative shelter opportunities in partnership with the faith community, nonprofits, the business community, and our neighborhoods. And shelter is not something that requires government sponsorship. We have a variety of privately run shelters serving a wide range of need in our community, including year-round, seasonal, and alternative shelters. Given the urgent need, we want to do everything we can to incentivize these privately led efforts. The waiver proposal you have in front of you will reduce the cost of shelter development, whether publicly or privately led. As you saw from Matt's presentation, these costs can be substantial and a significant deterrent, especially to faith communities and nonprofits that are seeking to create or improve shelter capacity. As importantly, this waiver creates a streamlined process. In fact, as we've moved to create shelters, the public interest in advancing those projects has been strong enough that the SDC bureaus have often ultimately granted waivers of the fees. But seeking waivers from each SDC bureau for each project is a time-consuming, staff and resource-intensive process that often slows projects down. This proposal eliminates that complexity and will allow shelters to be created more quickly. The proposal before you will be one more important tool in our efforts to address the crisis of unsheltered homelessness in our community, and the Joint Office welcomes the opportunity to play a role in the implementation of this new tool. I thank you again for your consideration of this proposal.
So Mark, could you talk a little bit about this mechanism of confirmation versus operating agreement? And I'm guessing that the old rule that 10 years and an operating agreement was in part designed to make sure that the cost benefit was amortized over a period of time, and the operating agreement was a way of verifying that there was a relationship. How would you envision the confirmation process working?
I'm going to let Matt take the first run at it, because I'm not clear that an operating agreement was part of the 10-year waiver either.
Yeah, an operating agreement isn't currently required.
So how does the confirmation process work?
So I think this is something that we will have to work out in terms of the formal process. What we would expect is the presentation of a desire to move forward with the shelter. In fact, most shelters in our community are going to have our involvement actively in multiple stages, including as a funder. So we expect that in the vast majority of situations, there would be an operating agreement. We have the ability to verify that a shelter is going to be open and is open and operating as planned. I think what we're trying to create is space for those community-led efforts that don't necessarily require our funding or an operating agreement with us, but where we know that provider is out in the community and is delivering shelter services. So how we document that, this will be a new process, but clearly we'll need to have some very specific mechanisms in place.
So I have obviously great confidence in how you work that out, and I'm sure I'm restating the obvious, but I would think that a letter addressed to the director and the commissioner in charge, simply notifying them that this is being triggered, describing the project, making the request so it can be acted on, is a good place to start, and then we can fine-tune that over time.
Absolutely, and I think we'll have the record of application for permits and so forth that have come forward that have triggered the SDC conversations. I think we'll have a good record to verify that this is in fact the intended use and be able to monitor that.
This proposal says that the burden is placed on the joint office to do these notifications, including if the entity ceases operating as a shelter. Do you have adequate resources to undertake that responsibility?
We will undertake the responsibility. We'll have to look at what the actual administrative impact is. The current volume of shelters is not that high, so we don't anticipate that this is going to be a big body of work for us. But as it becomes clear what's necessitated, we'll have to look at our existing budget for shelter operations and potentially seek whatever additional support we need. Yeah, operationally for us, because we are in the lead on a lot of these shelter projects, there'll likely be a net benefit in terms of our capacity. If we're not having to pursue individual SDC waivers for shelters, we can put that time back into the monitoring activity as well.
Thank you.
Very good. Colleagues, further questions? Does that complete the presentation for this panel?
That's correct.
Very good. So we have some invited testimony. Thank you, all three of you very much. Stacy Bork is here, as well as Rose back. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. I'm Rose Bach, the Director of Homeless and Housing Services at Catholic Charities of Oregon. As you may know, we operate a variety of services for people who are experiencing homelessness or for people who have left homelessness, including the Kenton Women's Village. The Kenton Women's Village has been a very successful alternative shelter model, and we have a very strong relationship with the neighborhood in the Kenton neighborhood. The neighbors are very involved in the village, they volunteer at the village, and share in the village's success. I know that you, Mayor Wheeler, were visiting about a month ago, and at that time we let you know that 18 women had moved into permanent housing, but as of today, 20 women from the village have left long-term chronic homelessness and moved into permanent housing, so we're very pleased about that. At Catholic Charities, we believe very strongly that small alternative shelters are a very good model for people who are not successful in larger shelters. The sense of security and privacy that women have at the village, as well as long-term intensive case management, has really proved to be a key for folks to move on out of homelessness. People have secured jobs, started small businesses, left domestic violence relationships, and sought recovery from addiction and mental health disorders through their work at the village. We at Catholic Charities are actively pursuing additional alternative shelters like Kenton Women's Village, but we believe that the system development charges are prohibitive, and applying for individual waivers really impedes our ability to be nimble and flexible and to start new sites. So we ask that you would approve the waiver for shelters and support additional villages like Kenton Women's Villages moving forward. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, and I just want to say how impressed I am with your work and how impressed I was with the women at the Women's Kenton Village. And I really appreciated their hospitality. It was nice of them to invite me and show me the village, the programming there, but invite me into their homes and see what they're working on. And I just have to say, I was so impressed that there was a micro enterprise going on there as well. And so there were two women who are taking economic control of their lives and becoming entrepreneurs and delivering a product which I thought was fantastic. So I appreciated it so much.
Absolutely, thank you. We invite all of you when we move to the new location in January to come. We'll give you all invitations. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Stacy Bork, Senior Director of Programs with Transition Projects. Thanks for bringing this important change forward. Over the last 3 years, Transition Projects has opened 13 shelters in 13 different locations, including permanent, winter, and temporary shelters, all with the support of this council and the Joint Office of Homeless Services. All of our shelter expansion has been intentional and strategic, striving to meet both the emergent needs of people sleeping unsheltered tonight and providing stability as people transition back into housing. Last year, Transition Projects provided safe sleep for more than 3,700 different people and helped more than 1,000 people return back to permanent housing. As you know, our budgets are to open new programs are small, the timelines are often short, and the demand is critical. These are life-saving services. Everything we do to speed up and make the process more efficient matters most to the people who are in crisis and need the services today. Your support of this waiver allows us to dedicate our energy and our resources towards getting people safe inside and back in housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions for this man? Thank you for your great work. Public testimony on this item, Pearl.
We have 7 people signed up. The first 3 are Robert West, Robert Patterson, and Charles Bridgecrane Johnson.
2 minutes each, please.
Yes, Mayor, this is Robert West. You received an award, I believe it was 2 years ago, for getting the veterans off the streets. And I'm finding more and more people are on the streets. I think that the city should waive any fees of these shelters and stuff. These shelters shouldn't have to be burdened with the fees and stuff. If you notice, there's homeless all over the place. We've even had homeless protests outside where individual got assaulted and robbed and was brought into City Hall for first aid, just to be kicked out by security because the person was not injured on City Hall property. Then when the police decided to deal with it, which was over an hour later, the guy that was pepper sprayed actually had to walk 4 blocks to speak with the police, which I thought was totally disgusting. Also, a couple days ago, they had a protest out back by your car, in which a number of
Mr. West,
homeless protesters.
Is this testimony going to focus on the matter at hand? which
Yeah, it
is
is. It is.
shelters?
It is.
Okay, if you can
Okay.
get to that
Okay.
part of the subject.
You were were homeless protesters were shoved by your G4S security guards. We need more shelter.